You're just online, sorry, sir. Sorry, mute. You are online, Dots. You're on mute too.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. Tēnā koutou, ngā me mō te komiti. Tēnā au he uri o Ngāti Kauwhata, o Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga, o Ngāti Haua e mihi atu ana. I won't read my submission, obviously, because that's taken as read, but I've got a few points that I want to follow up on. Can I just point out that what a privilege to follow the Honourable Christopher Finlayson. The point I want to make about that is that when you've got people like Chris Finlayson and Eddie Jury, two of the great legal minds in the history of our country, sort of opposing this bill, it says a lot about the state of this bill and the constitutionality of it and all those things. I think it's quite wonderful to see diverse experts on the treaty from all sorts of different political perspectives coming out and opposing what is essentially a significantly flawed proposal. I was compelled to submit on this purely because I was following the commentary in the news media and on social media and really concerned about what that is doing to the fabric of our country. And while I respect David Seymour's right to make a proposed legislation like this, I think what's fundamentally happening here is a misunderstanding of the role of Parliament, the role of the Crown in relation to its engagement with Māori. As many people have already said, the treaty is a partnership between the Crown and Māori. So it's not for the Crown alone, it's not for the government alone to determine the rules that impact our people. You know, the fundamental flaws in this whole process has been really concerning, as a political scientist particularly, but also as an iwi member who's been involved in treaty research for my own people. There's two things I really want to touch on. The first is about this misconception about democracy purely being about rule by the majority. Democracy is about rule of the people for the people, yeah? So here we've got people constantly talking about, well, there should be a referendum so that the majority of New Zealanders can speak to this issue. It's just completely not understanding the principles of democracy that speak about protecting and recognising the interests of minority people, in this case, obviously Māori. I live between Australia and New Zealand. My wife's an Aboriginal scholar in Australia. I'm in Australia right now. It's actually the public holiday for Australia Day today, which is a controversial day in this place. We call it Invasion Day or Survival Day, but of course many Australians celebrate Australia Day. The issue is, in Australia they had a referendum last year around the voice to Parliament, a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be recognised in the Constitution, and that voice referendum was doomed to fail because you were having a majority seeking the views of the majority of Australians to make a call as to whether or not this voice should go through. Well, Aboriginal people, for example, are around 3 or 4% of the population, and Māori, if we're 15, 17, 20% of the population, we're a minority in our own country. So the proposal of a referendum was just really concerning, particularly when you think about what's happened, not just in New Zealand, but around the world, when referendums related to matters that particularly speak to the Indigenous people or the relationship with Indigenous people very rarely get up. But I don't think Mr. Seymour was doing that by accident. I think Mr. Seymour's whole desire with this legislation, with this whole debate, is while he has his own particular strong views about things, he knew very well that this will stir up concern amongst New Zealanders. There are people online, I read just this morning on some blog sites, people saying that the time has come for Māori to be put back in their place, which I find completely ironic given our place is Aotearoa. We are tangata whenua to Aotearoa. And the debate that's coming out of this particular proposal is really concerning. The other point I want to make is, and I'm actually friends with Don Brash, which my find I think is funny, but Don Brash used to talk about he iwi tahi tātou, yeah? In the Hobson's Pledge, they had that quote at the start of their submission. There's two things that I want to say about the use of that quote in this context. First, it's ironic that a Pākehā-led organisation like the Hobson's Pledge is using a Māori word, a Māori phrase that a Pākehā person spoke to Māori. It's like, how ironic that Pākehās are telling us what he iwi tahi tātou means in our own language. He iwi tahi tātou doesn't mean everyone is one and we're all exactly the same. It just fundamentally doesn't understand. You can bring people together and have a partnership and a connection, and we can become one for that particular purpose, but that doesn't mean we're all exactly the same. Everything we do is the same. We all should be treated exactly the same. He iwi tahi tātou has been misused and abused, not necessarily deliberately by people like Hobson's Pledge, but probably because they just don't understand. Having people who are not fluent in our language telling us what Governor Hobson meant when he said he iwi tahi tātou is just ridiculous. And the last point I want to make is, I think Mr. Seymour should focus on bigger issues around the Constitution. We're one of the countries in the world that doesn't have a written constitution, a comprehensively written constitution. There's a world where potentially that's a conversation that New Zealanders want to go on and have. This particular bill around the treaty principles, I mean, not only are these principles, the ones that he's proposed, just completely out of sync with what's actually the treaty is about. There are principles that already make sense in the context of the way our country has been operating for many, many years. And to do what Mr. Seymour is proposing to do, not only disrespects many, many years of lawmaking, but it also disrespects many people on his side of politics and across the political spectrum who have been fighting really hard to ensure that the treaty is honoured in a respectful way for all New Zealanders, because as people have said, the treaty's not just for Māori, it's for all. And the lovely guy who spoke earlier and said that he was tangata whenua, I liked his principle, but the reality is, you're a tangata whenua if you're from the land, if you're a Māori, yeah? And my uncle Eddie always talks about everyone else also has the right to be here as tangata tiriti. So the treaty is for everybody. That's my final point.
Good, Areti. Thank you for that submission. We've got 3 questions lined up. First is from Debbie Ngārewa-Packer, then Todd Stevenson, then Tracy McLeod.
Tēnā koe ahoa, ka pai ki te kiti a koe, and good to hear your voice and to receive your submission. The bill is going to be dead like a duck at second reading. What, in your opinion, in your expert opinion, needs to be the real next phase for a government to consider, not only the protection of te tiriti, but to conclude the division that this bill has created in Aotearoa for all New Zealanders?
Well, the relevant question I've been thinking about, because here in Australia, post the Voice referendum, there's a whole lot of soul searching happening, because what actually happened in that referendum was damaging to First Nations people here. And I don't want to dwell on that too much, but as you know better than me, Five, there's a lot of people who have been harmed by this process. The stuff that's written online about our people and our taumata and our pakeke and it's deeply hurtful, because a lot of it is deeply racist and harmful. But I think the government, I touched on the point about a written constitution. I feel like there's been so much work done by both government committees, organisations, our people around having conversations about the constitution and where it should go, and I think those should be given some proper weight. And they should be given weight not in line with that idea that democracy is rule by the majority, but rule by the people. Rule by the people, which includes the minority peoples having appropriate and respectful engagement and say in the process.
Gilda.
Thank you. We'll go to Todd, then Tracy.
Thanks, and thanks for your submission. I'm just on it's page 1 of your submission, and you've outlined 4 treaty principles as you see them. If this bill just basically legislated those 4 principles, what would be your position?
Well, my position is that the Crown shouldn't be determining these things without consultation with Māori in an appropriate way, outside of this Crown government-led process. The treaty, as I said earlier, is between Māori and the Crown. You've got a government minister of a minority tiny party with no real mandate, actually, to be pushing a major national issue like this, given the percent of support he has from New Zealand in his party. It's not the right place. It's not the right way to go about this. It's an insult to Māori that we go about this in this way. You should be asking Māori first what they want, and then having conversations, not forcing a bill down our throats like this.
Supplementary if I might.
No, sorry, we'll go to Tracy. Sorry.
Yes, Subu.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your submission. We've heard earlier that te tiriti inadvertently creates division by virtue of its mere existence. And this bill therefore appears, on the surface at least, to be seeking a solution to that by simply abandoning the principles. As a political scientist and someone I'm assuming would be interested in a more informed citizenry, what do you think we should be doing instead? Because I agree with Debbie when she says this isn't going to go away after this particular process. So how do we prepare ourselves for the next phase so that we come to a good outcome rather than a poor one?
Well, David Seymour should pump a few tens of millions of dollars into a commission with independent experts from around the world, including representatives of tangata whenua, and have a proper conversation then in that space first, and then see what they suggest.
Thanks, Areti. Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate you spending your time with us this morning. We're going to move now to submission from Professor Bronwyn Hayward. Bronwyn will be...
Pause it there. There we go.
Yep. He's friends with Don Brash, brave man.
Right.
Okay.
Admitting that publicly too.
Yeah. Okay, so he iwi tahi tātou. Does that mean parliamentary sovereignty? No, certainly doesn't translate to parliamentary sovereignty. It basically just means that we're one tribe. So it's like, okay, we're one nation. Basically, it's how we could translate that. So is the treaty undemocratic? No, I wouldn't even argue that, even by the logic of this bill. So when the treaty was signed, Māori were the dominant race in New Zealand. Okay, imagine if we were to grab this bill, okay, this current bill, and Māori were the dominant. Okay, how do you think a referendum between different ethnic groups would have impacted Pākehā settlers, considering they were the minority?
It wouldn't have ended well for them. That's what the treaty was about in the first place.
The treaty was about allowing for the Crown to essentially set up governance here in New Zealand, but not to, be sovereign, at least, under the Te Reo Māori version, which is the majority of what Rangatira signed. The purpose of the treaty was to allow the Crown to have essentially tikanga for Pākehā people that Māori people could understand. So it was in a way to improve relations between Māori and Pākehā, and to solidify those relations, especially between British people and Māori. And one of the triggers for the writing of this treaty was actually what happened to my own ancestors by the hands of Te Rauparaha. The British were so concerned about the massacre that had occurred that they thought, right, we've got to write a treaty. We've got to protect those trade routes. We've got to protect. We've got to, we've got to have a guarantee in place for Māori. We've got to be a good partner to Māori, so we have their trust, and so we can continue to settle in the land, because they were horrified by what happened. The fact that there was a Pākehā person involved in that massacre who sailed the ship that carried Te Rauparaha and his men. Yeah, there was outrage over this in Australia, and justice unfortunately was not sought because the guy who provided the boat managed to get away. So that was one of the triggers for writing the treaty, and people don't understand that part of the history.
See, I didn't know that part of it either, so thank you.
Yeah, so that's what happened down at Akaroa with my ancestors, and my ancestors were kidnapped by Te Rauparaha. So yeah, that was one of the triggers. And so it's really important to understand that this was not a contract between races. I keep harping this on and on again, but a contract between two governing parties to ensure that everyone was protected to prevent these types of outcomes from happening that would have impacted trade with the British Empire and would have impacted Māori's relations with the British.
Yeah. All right. Just let me know when you're ready to move on.
Oh yeah, I'm good. I was just waiting for. I was wondering if you had an opinion or anything.
Fair enough. Jeremy, we'll be wrapping up about 10 o'clock tonight. We have blocked out the entire day, so yeah. Yes, Dave, this will never end. This
will never end, and the technical problems will also never end as well.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram.